So you're sitting at a bus stop and you see someone attractive, someone you want to meet. And in 5 minutes, your life can be changed. Or in 2 hours of opera. Call it the bisexual bus stop. The opera's called Love Hate, and we're here with one of its creators, Rob Bailis. Welcome.
Great to see you, David.
So tell me, Love Hate, what's it about and how was that for a lead-in?
That was a terrific lead-in, actually. That is really what it's about. It is about two people who meet at a bus stop, or don't meet at a bus stop, and are trying to connect. And the entire course of the opera is about these 5 minutes of trying to muster the courage to say something and to break the ice. And there are many complications in this particular introduction. The first being that they are a heterosexual couple standing at that bus stop, and each of them is coming from same-sex relationships in the past. So part of their anticipation with each other and nervousness with each other is not knowing how to broach that particular subject.
And so, not knowing that the other person has just come out of a same-sex relationship as well.
So that's kind of the comic reveal.
Yeah, and you know, it's funny. I mean, as a member of the gay community, you know, we've dealt with what seems to be a stereotype, and correct me if you think I'm wrong. We probably all know men or women who were in opposite sex relationships and then discovered at some point in their life, you know, I'm gay, I've been living a lie, and they go into same-sex relationships. I think this may be the first bisexual opera, as I said.
Well, we can certainly hope so. We can certainly hope so. I think one of the things that we were really after with this particular plot, which in many ways it is a little bit without plot, this opera. It's about situation. It is that this particular bus stop moment comes back across the entire 2 hours of the piece. And in the first scene, you see 1 minute of the bus stop, and 3 scenes later, you see the second minute of the bus stop through these 5 minutes, which are performed in sum total only at the end of the piece. So you get the whole sort of picture of it. But the idea here was to take that structure that allowed for so much fantasy and so much play with time to work with 2 or 3 different elements. The first being certainly bringing in this feeling of San Francisco, that we live in this incredible...
So it's a San Francisco bus stop?
Oh, it's a San Francisco bus stop.
So this is the what, the 24 DeViz or the 37 Corbett?
I have one in mind, but I'm not telling you what it is.
Okay.
You'll have to tell me after you see it. You'll feel the situation of that particular bus stop, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I just came from the scene shop. I'm sure you will see the situation of that bus stop. But I think the idea here was to bring in that feeling of San Francisco, that this is a place that is so much about its socially progressive values and so much about the freedom of identity that comes with being a citizen here. It's sort of what everyone gravitates towards in this climate. And we felt we wanted to represent not just those beliefs, but those people, who are actually having these very complicated relationships with identity.
Right. Well, now you say that, of course, this is a very San Francisco story and a San Francisco situation, but the opera doesn't end here. It's going on to, what, Philly, New York, Houston?
Yeah.
I mean, Houston Grand Opera, great company, but I wouldn't say Houston a bastion of, like, formerly same-sex couples finding their girlfriends
in
at
new
bus
opera?
Stop. Yeah.
Right. Well, I think the interesting thing for us is that the piece, while it is premiering in San Francisco, was actually developed in New York and in Philadelphia with terrific support from a variety of sources on the East Coast. And no one's batted an eye. In a funny way, I think San Francisco is celebrating this piece because it is geographically and intentionally very San Franciscan. But it's really been embraced everywhere it's gone. So I think part of that is coming from the fact that the relationships are all over the map. Right. It's also comic, so there's a level of sort of an intention around being really silly with the situation and playing with what possibilities are there. Much of the piece takes place in fantasy in the minds of these particular characters. So you'll be sitting in someone's fantasy, and it's all about the last self-help seminar they went to and how horrible it was, and every bad piece of it.
It is a San Francisco plot, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah. How did you come to this work, and what came first, the chicken or the egg, the libretto or the
libretto
music?
first? Yeah.
And your partner in this, the composer, is
Jack Perla. Yep. The idea for the piece, ironically, came from another project that I was working on. A friend of mine was doing a performance art piece where she was inviting artists from all over the country to submit litanies of things they loved and things they hated, which would then be, in a very ephemeral way, performed by whoever was on stage at that particular moment in this performance marathon, and then summarily shredded, burned, or disposed of, right? So it was sort of this ritual about love-hate.
Zen theater, yeah.
Exactly. And Jack at the time was in New York working with a project at American Opera Projects called Composers in the Voice, which had asked him to, create this small sort of 20-minute work as part of their program. And he called me up and said, hey, do you have anything in the hopper? And I said, well, actually, I just pulled it out of the shredder. But yes, I've got this piece called Love Hate. So originally, I sent him just a litany of things I loved and things I hated. And slowly, we started pulling characters out of those love and hate intersections.
So the idea didn't come to you one day sitting at a bus stop?
No. The bus stop actually was the last thing that happened. The thing that is now holding the piece together is the very last idea that came to us. The whole thing was predicated on these 4 characters that we found sort of bobbing in the stew of this love-hate litany. And we just one by one started pulling them out and finding them and fleshing them out. And through really a series of 2 years of workshops on both coasts with all kinds of people involved, we've had wonderful playwrights involved. Albert Inarato was one of our dramaturgs, and Sandy Bernhardt from Houston Grand Opera, H.G. Oko has been a dramaturg with us. We've gotten to see the piece up at Galapagos Space in New York. We've gotten to see it at the Manhattan School of Music. So we've had a lot of time to look at it with all these characters surfacing, and also lots of different generations of people talking about it. Mm-hmm. So we've had very young people perform it, middle-aged people perform it, all kinds of people in between.
Wait, so how old are these characters, this man and this woman?
Early middle age is our intention.
Yeah.
But it's been performed by college students. So there's something about the nature of the relationships that drives the whole thing. It's really character-driven.
Right.
So the conceit around plot really entered in at the 11th hour.
So how did you come up with the idea to make these characters bisexual? How much of you is in this play?
Oh, a lot. I think that the interest I had initially was in these parallel same-sex relationships. So the relationship between the guys and the relationship between the girls. And there's, at one point, that was really the major track of the work. And there's this one moment where a girl's scene ends after they could have gotten back together and had this horrible sex in a motel. They stop themselves, and the last line of the scene is, "It could be worse. We could be men," which just jump cut to the men in the next room going at it. Yeah. So there was that kind of play in the piece, and it just, as those things came together and continued to grow as plot twists, it just felt like there was no way to not talk about the bisexuality or the heterosexuality of the situation. It just felt like that was also there too. We wanted to really talk about identity more than sexuality.
Well, that brings up an interesting point. What is the role of gender identity, sexual identity, not only in this play, but now we can go back and, under the microscope or through the lens of 2012, look at everything from Shakespeare to Tennessee Williams and say, was that character straight, gay, bisexual? Who is Viola in Shakespeare? All that stuff.
Right. And what does it mean now?
What does it mean now?
Do we want to see it through that lens? Do we need to? What does it say about the original text? I mean, I think my theory is that there's been as much variety and as much diversity in Western culture from day one as there is now. I think things are more visible, and of course we fought very hard for the privileges and rights that we have and must continue to do so. But I do think that these aspects of human nature and of nature itself are ever present.
Well, living in San Francisco and being a part of the cultural community, we deal with these on our stages and in our living rooms. I think we joked before the cameras went on that, as Charles Pierce used to say, people always, that great comic that, I'm dating myself, those who don't know Charles Pierce, but people always say, are you bisexual? And I say no, but if you buy me something, I'll be sexual. But I mean, in the last 10 years, talking about the B in LGBT and the T, the transgender and LGBT, that's something that's been fairly new in our living rooms, much less on our stages.
Yep.
Do you see this as a trend? Issues of sexual identification and gender on our stages?
I think things sort of went in the order that you would expect them to go, looking at where the power sits in society. Men got it first, women got it second, then everything in between sort of surfaced, which is horrifying when you think about what that implies. But the reality of it is, I think that San Francisco is leading the way in the conversation around identity, that it is absolutely liquid, and that everyone is, has the right to define however they choose and to live safely and well in those efforts and those definitions and expressions of their human intent. So I do think that the sort of filling out of the rainbow, as they say, is critically important to the progression of our culture, and I do think that there's a commitment to that in this piece, that we are accepting these things as absolutely part of daily life.
Right. So the music. Is this more Mozart or more Philip Glass?
Here's the fun part. It's all of the above. So Jack and I have been working together as collaborating musicians for 20 years. We met in graduate school and have remained close colleagues ever since. And for many years, I championed his music as a performer. That was sort of how our relationship started creatively. So I toured his music as a clarinetist, and we were involved in a number of different projects together. And one of the things that's always attracted me to Jack's music is he's an absolute omnivore. He is competent, capable, expressive, and genius in so many different forms. So he's won the Thelonious Monk Prize for jazz composition. Wow. He's had his classical works performed by symphonies all over the country. His operas have been commissioned, now by Seattle Opera, by Houston Grand, by now there's some other ones in the hopper I can't talk about yet. So he's doing great. But his music is absolutely drawn from the fabric of American culture. So everything you can imagine is in there. There's all these quotes from The Doors, from The Fifth Dimension. So there's a pop element in there that sort of buoys along with the fun of these characters and also the sort of fullness of their identity references.
Right. So after San Francisco, where does it go? Tell us where we can see and hear Love Hate.
Our really great stroke of good fortune is that the next stop after San Francisco is where we'll be at the Opera America Conference in Philadelphia. So this has been selected to be presented there as one of the great new works going on this year in the country. So it'll be seen by producers all over the country in that instance, which we're thrilled by. We have commitments at this point in Philadelphia, in New York, and then in Houston. So it'll tour to those three cities after San Francisco across 2012 and 13.
Great. Well, thanks for being on the show. We look forward to this
so much.
Bisexual bus stop. I'm going to stick. You may use that. That
I may use it. I like it.
Next up, just how gay were the Bloomsburys? We'll find out.